You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. This episode of Pizza Quest is brought to you by Central Milling. Hand-selected grain, expertly milled for passionate bakers. Visit centralmilling.com to learn more. This episode of Pizza Quest is brought to you by Forno Bravo, makers of the world's finest modular and assembled wood and gas-fired pizza ovens. Learn more about their products at fornobravo.com. Welcome to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt, and I'm here today with a very special guest because we're going to have a show that's all about cheese. Joe Salonia, welcome to Pizza Quest. Let me introduce you to our viewers, those who don't already know you from your podcast, Cutting the Curd, which you co-host with a few other cheese, like we call ourselves the pizza freaks. You guys are the cheese freaks. Mm-hmm. And I want to get into some cheese with you today, and especially your specialty area. I know that you started out as a classic to the Culinary Institute of America. You worked as a chef. You were a rising star chef in New Jersey. You had a whole culinary career and track lined up. And then around 20 some years ago, you left all that and entered the wide world of cheese, where you were doing marketing and sales for a couple of very large distributing companies. And then, 2013 or so, you joined up with Gourmino. As Gourmino is a large cheese company, right? Tell us a little bit about Gourmino, because you've been with them for the last 10 years, direct marketing and sales for the United States. So tell us about Gourmino, what you do, and what kind of cheeses you specialize in.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm a chef by trade, and those jobs led me to this wonderful opportunity in 2013. Actually, Gourmino is, in my opinion, a rather small company. It's a cheesemaker owned, 13 cheesemakers own and operate. So it's a rather beautiful model for business. It's deconstructed, decentralized business model where everybody has a voice, and the cheesemakers are the owners of the company and also do their own affinage. So we produce, age, long ripen, and market all within one company for Gourmino Swiss cheeses, and they're based in the Emmental in Switzerland. And I've been the USA and marketing employee for them for 10 years. It's coming up on 10 years.
So they're based in Switzerland. The company's based in Switzerland. The cheesemakers themselves are over in Switzerland. These are not American Swiss cheesemakers, but and you mentioned Emmental. Is that the actual location? Is that a city in Switzerland, and that is sort of the home for what we know as Emmentaler cheese?
Yeah, that's the birthplace. So the Emmental is a rather large area. So Switzerland has like cantons or like states, and the biggest one being like Bern is really kind of like the center of where the Emmental history takes place. Although the Emmental area actually spreads out through a large swath, because at one time there were 600 dairies, and now there's only about 115 or so, 110 Emmentaler AOP dairies. So the area still comprises a large swath, but this is the birthplace of the cheese that we call Swiss cheese, but we call it Emmentaler, and that's how we refer to the cheese. Emmentaler AOP even is a more specific to understand. This is the proprietary version. This is Switzerland Emmentaler AOP, where the original recipe and the original birthplace of this cheese still is being made in a traditional way, handcrafted. Milk is delivered twice a day. It's raw milk. We're able to long ripen it because of our ability of crafting cheese with beautiful milk, and the rules that enable that milk to be like a system for the cheesemakers to happen. It's named after the Emi River and the Emi Valley, and this is how the cheese gets its name. So this is the original version of what we call Swiss cheese.
Swiss cheese, yeah. So to Americans, Swiss cheese is sort of this big category, but what we call Swiss cheese here really is in the category specific to Emmental, as opposed to Gruyere and other types of Swiss cheese.
Yeah, it's actually flipped in a way. So that at the contests that we enter, they'll actually call it Swiss rinded, because there's Swiss unrinded, which we don't make, and then Swiss rinded, which would be the Emmental that you see in the picture behind me, which is where we can put a wheel in for competition. So it's even flipped. So out of the Swiss rinded, you might have other cheeses with holes that have rinds on them, but we're entering Emmentaler AOP, our production, and we've won the title for that category multiple times, like over 10 times over the span of when Gorminos started as a company in 2001. We've won the last 3 contests for first prize in the Swiss Rind category. And it's an honor for me, a guy from northern New Jersey,
Yeah.
to represent. I'm humbled all the time. Anytime I connect with my team and understand their work, it's just humbling work, because what they're doing is such beautiful work, based in tradition, and the model and the values in our philosophy are really things we'd love to live by. So we live a certain way. It's our ideals, and it happens to match with the way the cheese is produced and how we want to market the cheese.
So this is not just the mass-produced cheese. This is the artisan version of what we know of as the Swiss-style cheeses.
Yeah.
Which I want to get into with you, because I know for those of you who are with us today, Joe's going to take me through a little tasting in the later segment today. We got 4 cheeses, including Emmental, but I went to my local favorite cheese shop, my cheesemonger, Ormond's Cheese, which carries Gormino's Emmentaler, but she was out. She was out of your cheese. She did have some of your Gruyere and some other cheeses from Gormino. So I've got 3 cheeses that I picked up at Ormond's, and 1 cheese. The Emmental is basically a generic that I was able to get at a local market. So what I want to find out from you is what I'm missing in this cheese, and because they're charging a fairly good price for it, so it better be good, but it's probably not going to be what you're doing, and it's probably not raw milk, because you said you're using raw milk cheese for yours, and so I want to find out all these nuances and differences, because I'm fascinated with the whole world of cheese. I mean, cheese is a huge category in general. We've had some other cheese shows in the past where we've talked about Italian cheeses and this and that, but we haven't focused on the Swiss style. And so we got a lot to learn today, and I want to dive into it. But before we do, Rachel, the owner of Ormond's Cheese, who you know as well as I do, because she used to have her shop up in New York City.
Yeah, dear friend.
And as soon as I told her what I was doing with you, she said, "You're going to do a show with Joe. Say hi for me, and also make sure you ask him to sing." She said he loves to sing, and I noticed in your bio that it says you love to do cheesy versions of popular and classical songs. Can you give us just a couple bars of a taste of your cheesy songs?
Okay, here's a general one maybe for you. Let me think. Let me get the right 2 bars for you. If you love somebody, if you love someone, if you love somebody, if you love someone, send them cheese, 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 send them cheese.
There you go. There's a Valentine for you, a little a cheese. That's great. So
I always like to connect cheese with love. Our culture of the cheese world, there's a lot of love in the room. We love cheese. It's a very unique culture, the cheese people. Maybe it's the same with the pizza people. I'd love to get to know them. I really would, because I love pizza.
Well, there's an awful lot of crossover.
We're all on the. We're really all, and I'll use your word, quest. We're on the quest to constantly raise good flavor profiles through education, through tasting, to get the stories of the cheesemakers out there, so that the cheeses that share these values of handcraft, tradition, history, being made by people that we can name and see, will continue on and not get pushed out by, larger manufactured cheeses that, aren't speaking to those values. And Gormino's with the last and only affineur that's long ripening, hand washing, and making this cheese in the Emmental.
Yes.
And we have 2 affinage houses. So it's we make other cheeses, like Gruyere AOP, one of them.
Yeah.
But Emmentaler AOP is really what's near and dear to our hearts as well.
So you used a lot of terminology that is very, familiar to those who are cheesemakers, and to the listeners of Cutting the Curd, they probably know exactly what you're talking about. The people who are, following us today on Pizza Quest may or may not know some of the things that, that you sort of just mentioned. So I'd like to go back and kind of get a sense of what these things mean. First of all, what is Swiss cheese? And you mentioned something about wash, was it a
Yep.
running wash or whatever
Okay. Yeah.
the differences. So yeah, if you
Yeah.
could give us sort of Swiss cheese 101 right now, that would be awesome.
Okay. Well, we know when people say Swiss cheese. Do you have any Swiss cheese? They're probably looking for a cheese with holes. They may not even be aware that Emmentaler AOP is a choice. There's cheeses like, I don't know. Let's use a very popular one that's out there is Jarlsberg. Some folks I still have to remind, hey, by the way, that's from Norway, and they're like, Norway?
Oh, yeah.
They make cheese in Norway? I mean, this is the
Tastes
people
like Swiss cheese.
like what? How can they do that and call it? And like, I know this is the challenge. So Swiss cheese has unfortunately even I think at some point in the 20s, the Swiss I think he wanted to make it easy for their larger markets, the English speaking, probably America too, to make it easy. So instead of saying Emmentaler, they said just call it Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
And it backfired by the time these copies came around and just called. So there was no control over the name until 2001, where the area of protection, the AOP, there's a longer, more elaborate term for it, but for our purposes, it's protected version of the name. It didn't become protected until only 2001. So, and until that point, all these copies had flooded the market under different names. Other companies have set up, even companies that were founded by Swiss immigrants, like in Finland in the 1879, because there was a stock market crash in 1879 that doesn't get talked about as much as the big one that we know in the third 1929. But in 1879, there was another slip, and that caused a lot of people to move around. And the Finlandia company was founded by Swiss immigrants, and that's how that recipe So it's the birthplace of the recipe. Swiss cheese can simply mean, for most people, cheese with holes. So what I say is Emmentaler is the original Swiss cheese with holes.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
If I'm doing a quick tasting and I need to give someone a quick bite, like, hey, you want to try the original cheese with holes? Emmentaler AOP. They'll hear the first.
Well, what does AOP mean? You mentioned that term a lot.
Basically means area of protection. It's it's in the translated sense. So it means that a certain geographical area will apply only to where the milk can be gathered. And then there's a set of rules, like I'm talking like a 50-page book on the cow, down to the cow breeds, the temperature in which the milk can be stored, the length of time that it must be stored and delivered before it's made into cheese, what the cows can eat, what they cannot eat. Like, for instance, to make a long ripened cheese, you cannot give a cow silage, which is the preserved hay balls that you see in the plastic in farms when you see sometimes when you're driving around rural areas. That's basically like coleslaw, or like it's fermented hay. So it puts gas into the cow, puts gas into the milk. The cheeses don't develop properly. So that's a forbidden thing. So it always must be fresh hay, meaning hay that's been dried from the region, or grass. Very little supplemental grains, or the tolerance is tiny if you want to give the cow like a treat. But basically, it just, and again, there's dozens of rules, right down to how the wheels are labeled, the size they must adhere to, the bacteria. There's even a DNA placed in every wheel, which is an undetectable. It's actually a detectable marking that does not affect any outcome of the cheese, but can be looked at under a microscope just to know whether or not it's a real Emmentaler. If there's,
it's like putting a GPS on the wheel.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah. This is like the designation of authenticity, and that it's certified to have followed this thick rule book of stipulations on how to make this cheese.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, the word Emmentaler, Swiss cheese. If you and I want to make cheese in Pennsylvania, we can and make it with holes. I think it would be pretty lame to call it this, but no one would probably stop us from calling it Emmental or Gruyere. Sadly, now the word Gruyere by itself, Gruyere, not Le Gruyere AOP, but Gruyere is not protected anymore, according to Virginia court judge. There was a Virginia court ruling, one appeal even, so two rulings in Virginia. And for this reason, it's important to uphold and even say out loud, even if you're not going to expect your guests to remember it, at least for the cheesemongers, to call it Emmentaler AOP, Le Gruyere AOP, and so on for the other proprietary cheeses, because they are copied. And we want the customer, at least to let the customer make an educated guess, not be fooled.
And if you want the real thing and you're shopping, you want to hear those letters AOP as a way of sort of designating that you've got the real deal.
Or see it on the label. Some great shops might not label it that way, but we're trying to encourage, because of this ruling, you're going to see more copies of Gruyere and especially Gruyere. It's kind of under attack because it's such a well-sold cheese that it's too tempting for cheesemakers all over the world to just make a cheese that's kind of like Gruyere, and now they're allowed to call it Gruyere, at least in the USA. So USA makers can call any cheese that they feel like they want to call Gruyere. They can call it Gruyere with impunity now. At least it could change, but that's the update now with this new ruling. So it behooves us, if we're really flying the flag for Le Gruyere AOP, to at least say it, or maybe put your sign in the store to say it, so the customer will at least hear it and let them make an educated decision, that they know it's different than what they might find at another store from, say, a commodity brand that's just labeling their cheese Gruyere or smoked Gruyere, which is also forbidden. There's no such thing as a smoked authentic Gruyere, but there's, these, again, borrowing of the name without permission.
Sure. And marketing folks are famous for being able to appropriate all the hard work that other people put in and grab it and you use it to sell their product instead of having something that says like it's like Gruyere. They can say it's Gruyere and we can't do anything about it.
I mean, I have more respect for the copies that come up with their own ingenious marketing name. I think that's fine.
Give them the name,
but it's in this, and then they can explain in maybe their sales meeting, this cheese was inspired by Gruyere. But to actually put the name on the cheese, I think is just really, to me, it's stealing the name.
It's got to feel like a slap in the face to the authentic artisan cheesemakers. But let's step one step back and say, first, let's look at Swiss cheese in general, and then Gruyere is one type. Emmental is a type. Let's come back and zero in on each one because they're all different from each other. But what makes cheese, in this sort of quote Swiss category? What is the type of cheese and how is it made in general?
Well, many of them, not all, many of them are what we call cooked curd cheeses, and then they're aged. So cooked and pressed curds, cooked and pressed cheeses are going to be cheeses where after the rennet is introduced, which kind of makes the curd separate from the whey, then the curd is cut. Yeah. Then you have a lot of water in with the little kernels of curd that have been cut. At that point, they cook the curd further to make more water come out of the curd. And then
they just add more hot water to it. Is that at a certain temperature?
Sometimes they'll add water, but it's more about heating up the kettle.
Oh, heating the kettle. Okay.
And this is where a copper kettle is really important because copper can conduct heat 20 times more efficiently than stainless steel. So you don't want to have hot spots. So a copper kettle is sometimes a rule even for some of the cheeses, like Le Gruyere AOP. The copper must come up totally to the top. It must be 100% lined with copper in order for it to be made. And this step, which was discovered maybe more than 1,000 years ago, which also preserved cheese longer. So when you're able to age cheese longer, you need it to be drier. So you need to cook and expel more water out of the curd in order to press it more, make it firm, and then age it in a cellar like you see behind me. And that there you can take a cheese if it's good. If the milk was good, the craft was done well, and there were no funny things happening with anything where it would throw the cheese off its profile, you can age it up longer to maybe 2 years.
So the cooking of the curds is not something that occurs with every type of cheese up until the point of making the curds, cutting them, and that's very much like every cheese. And then at this point, an additional step of heating the curds to a certain temperature is part of the signature of this style.
Yeah, it's a signature for many of the styles in Switzerland. Not all, but many. I mean, there are uncooked curds. There are cheeses that resemble like a camembert. Camembert is not a cooked curd. You set the curd, then you ladle it as big a piece of. It'll look like panna cotta, a piece of milk jello that you can take out of the little.
Yeah, it feels like custard.
Stock pot of set curd. You'll ladle it into a mold, trying to put the least amount of move so that it stays creamy. So the more you cut it and the more you cook it, the firmer of a cheese you're going to wind up getting, like a Parmigiano. The more uncooked, bigger curd, that's how you get creamy cheeses.
I see. So the cooked curds, okay, so now let's say we're talking about Emmental, for instance. We'll focus on that particular cheese. So those are made from cooked curds that are then put into a mold of some sort and essentially as much water as possible is pressed out of it.
Yep,
And then is there something called a washed rind? What is, or, you know,
Well,
what is there a washing that takes place?
yeah, well, it'll go into a brine in this case, like many other cheeses are brine. Some cheeses that are going through this step can also be hand salted, but in this case, for Emmental, they're put into a dense saltwater brine for about 2 days, and that'll form not only flavor, but it'll form a crust. It'll form an equilibrium, of saline inside the cheese, which also help balance bacterial growths for certain, and less so for undesirable type microorganisms. And then from there, the washing must continue. So you want a microflora to start developing on the crust, on the rind, which will happen like some fuzzy, greenish, whitish, usually white, slightly greenish molds, which is normal. And then it's washed with saltwater brine. In our case, by hand at the start, and then some for longer ripening will get a wash with a robot. But all of ours are washed at some point in their lifespan by hand, meaning like a cloth, and one of our workers is in there, and like the way they wash their car, because these wheels are big, it's like washing a small Volkswagen Beetle or something. It's
So the washing is critical to the process. I'm just thinking as a layman, because the salt in the wash controls the bacterial development. Mm-hmm. Is there any bacteria injected into the milk itself before it goes into the curding to start a particular flavor development?
Absolutely. And that's like the spice rack, if you will, of the recipe. That's the inoculation or introduction of the whatever enzymes. So Switzerland has the greatest stockpile of probably bacteria in the world. They have one major laboratory which has preserved 15,000 different strains of bacteria. Each dairy has their own independent bacteria. Some dairies will propagate their own whey cultures. Like we have one dairy that actually makes their own whey cultures and also introduces this bacteria into their make. And it's the difference between, like, say, an Emmentaler and a La Gruyere. What the biggest difference will be that different bacteria are involved, giving different flavor.
The type of cheese is partly determined by the type of bacteria.
Yeah, that's going to steer the flavor the most.
Is Gruyere like Emmental is an actual area and region? Is Gruyere also a region of Switzerland that's known for their style of cheese?
Well, Gruyere is a actual town, a village, Gruyères, and then there's 4 little cantons that are 5 now. Bern is included that are surrounding those areas. It's all in southwestern Switzerland.
So I know that for some things, like with sourdough bread, for instance, we know that there's this culture of various bacteria that help to form those flavors. Do each of these regions have their own sort of indigenous bacterial strains that influence the flavor to give it that distinctive Jarlsberg or Emmental, character?
Absolutely, they do. And so I want to speak to that in a second, and I just want to even emphasize that bank of bacteria. It's great that they collected at one point 15,000 strains from all the dairies that ever were, because some of those dairies no longer make cheese, and they at least captured what they were making, because at one point it was always made only in the dairy. That's the only way that bacteria was ever grown. It was self-made culture. So if you go back 40, 50 years, not even that long, that was the only way to get your bacteria going, was to self-propagate your own house culture.
Like keeping a sourdough starter, you had to have your own mother starter.
Exactly. And there's a lot of trends where we see that's happening more and more, especially in America, some American cheese making. In Switzerland, for the AOP cheeses, I guess the choice was made at one point to have more continuity, to have, moreover, lab-grown bacterial cultures, with some exceptions. Maybe you're allowed to add, for some AOP cheese, maybe you're allowed to add in some of your own house cultures, but they must include these other cultures in order for it to be, qualified as whatever AOP cheese it is. And then it'll get inspected. Usually the AOP cheeses are not just produced and put into market. There's a third party that they're kind of controlling all the quality. Like, for instance, IGP is the Gruyere entity that will control Emmentaler AOP. They also have their own entity where they're going to control the quality to make sure that it's at least up to the standard of what Emmentaler should, the minimum that it can bear for quality, taste, appearance, texture profile, all the things. And only then can it bear the label if it's going through progression, before it's released, which is, again, the arrogance of this ruling in Virginia, is that there's none of that happening with whoever decides to call their cheese Gruyere. It's their own QC and their own house. And then if they want to call it, they call it, but there's nobody checking the quality. So even a Le Gruyere AOP dairy is not guaranteed the privilege of calling every wheel that they produce Le Gruyere AOP. There still has to be an inspection for every lot in order for them to bear that label. And sometimes the cheese cannot bear the label, and it's usually sold as a secondary mountain cheese, not under the name.
Interesting. So, but it'll find a life somewhere, but not with the same cachet and with the same price point either, probably.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So now we've got this sort of general category, and we're coming to a point where we're going to want to take a little break here because I'm dying to dive into these cheeses that I have behind me, have you guide me, through the tasting, because we know that there's bacteria at work here creating and influencing flavors. There's a type of the curds have been cooked that differentiates it from, say, a lot of the Italian style cheeses that are not cooked curds, and or the French cheeses. There's also I have a Gruyere here. No, I have another one here, a raclette, which is technically, I think, it's a Swiss cheese, but this one is a French raclette. The French seem to have again appropriated ownership of the raclette category. But I want to learn about each one of these and why they're different. And I'm guessing it starts with the combination of the cooked curds, the bacterial choice that's used in those, and then the washing of the rinds in the cheeses that use a washed rind cheese. These are all characteristics of this style that fall under the big umbrella of Swiss cheese, but then get differentiated into specific types. So far, am I checking it off right?
Yeah, I mean, you're accurate. It's general what you're saying. There's deeper dives into all the things you said, but yes. Yeah,
well, we're still in class 101. So
yeah, we're keeping it 101. I'm not a cheesemaker either. I'm speaking from what my
you're our bridge to this world that's a world of mystery to anyone who hasn't studied it. Just like wines and beers are mysteries to people that are just diving in at the beginning. But hopefully, by the time we finish today, I'll be at 201 or 202 instead of 101. Because I want to get further along, because I want to be able to go into a conversation at a cheese board somewhere with folks and impress them with a little bit of knowledge that I gleaned from you today. So
sounds like
why don't we take a break, Joe?
Okay.
We'll come back in part 2. And you can guide me through these cheeses that we've assembled here and turn me into a little bit of a cheese wonk.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, and we're with Joe Salonia. He's with Gourmino Cheese Company, but more importantly, to all of us in the Heritage Radio Network world, he's one of the co-hosts of Cutting the Curd, a weekly podcast that airs that you can go back and watch and listen to all sorts of episodes that they've already posted and will continue to post. I got to be a guest on your podcast yesterday, and today you're returning the favor and coming on our podcast. Yeah. So we're kind of crossing over and sharing our various what do you call it, our individual quests, but also our sort of passions for the subjects that we love. So Joe, thank you. We'll see you in part 2. We'll see all of you in part 2. Join us in just a couple of moments. This episode of Pizza Quest is brought to you by Central Milling, hand-selected grain, expertly milled for passionate bakers. Central Milling is the farmer, the miller, and the baker working together to preserve American farmland for tomorrow while providing the highest quality flour and grains for the bakers of today. Dating back over 150 years, Central Milling is built on generations of knowledge, and they know that premium flour starts at the source. Employee-owned, Central Milling works directly with their farmers to sustainably grow grains that have exceptional flavor, nutrient content, color, and baking performance, which results in one of the largest selections of premium specialty flour and grains in the country. Hand-selected for the highest baking qualities, milled, cracked, or blended slowly to minimize heat generation, then bake-tested for performance. Learn more about Central Milling and their products at centralmilling.com. Forno Bravo produces the world's finest modular and assembled pizza ovens. Since 2003, Forno Bravo has provided beautiful and well-made wood and gas-fired brick ovens to homes, outdoor kitchens, restaurants, and mobile businesses around the world. Forno's ovens stretch from basic to professional models. Cast refractory, steel, and brick cores. Modular kits and fully assembled ovens to meet any requirement, as well as custom tile patterns, colors, logos, and exterior shapes. Emphasizing variety as well as quality and craftsmanship, Forno Bravo creates the perfect aesthetic for your space as well as solid technology. After thousands of satisfied customers, Forno Bravo is just getting started. Learn more about their products at fornobravo.com. Welcome back to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt. I'm here with Joe Salonia of Gormino Cheese, a company that specializes in Swiss-style cheeses. We'll use as we've learned in part one of today's episode, a big generic category that has much more specifics hidden within there. And we're going to learn about those specifics in part two. Before we start the tasting, I wanted to ask you about something else that I know you were associated with something called the Save the Emmentaler campaign, or what is that?
Oh, thanks for asking. So the Save the Emmentaler campaign just speaks again to our philosophies and values in preserving and celebrating the canonical, original king of Swiss cheese, which is the cheese with holes, the cheese. I mean, if you ask a fourth grader to draw a cheese, they're going to draw an Emmentaler. The emoji on our iPhone is, as the cheese emoji is, by all measures, an Emmentaler AOP cheese, or that's how it's so. But unfortunately, it's copied, and the market is filled with many copies. And just through education and celebration, we want to help people rediscover this cheese that might not already be familiar with, understanding what's the difference, and also why should it matter, you know?
Yeah.
And the why is actually the biggest part, is that it preserves tradition, preserves landscapes, you could argue. It preserves a lot of beautiful systems that would otherwise go away, that really make this world, to me, a better place than if it were not.
So it really is, it speaks to the sort of other analogies, the slow food movement, or other artisan movements. We have one in the pizza world called These Hands movement, which is to respect the craft of the artisans who make pizzas by hand, and this is cheese that's made by hand as well.
100%. It is made by hand. They're just with the assistance of some, with the kettle and some lifting and things like that. But it's made by hand, washed by hand, aged, tasted. All that's done with our team. And we actually have a slow food production, an Emmentaler AOP that meets the slow food criteria. So it's one dairy only, and it's even a longer list of caveats of what must apply to the AOP. It's even stricter rules, everything down to the elevation of where the dairy lies, its proximity to the cellar, proximity to the dairy farmers, the almost zero tolerance of the cow's diet can be, just really comprised of hay and grass, and the self-produced house cultures actually are a requirement for the slow food.
Is there a particular breed of cow that is associated with the Emmental cheese?
Well, there's the Simmental breed, which is the oldest breed in Europe, in theory, that's walking around, and those cows are around. And then there's a breed that's kind of a hybrid of the Red Holstein and the Simmental, I believe, and that's called the Red Fleckva, and that's very common as well. But breeds will apply, to what can be allowed.
Another thing that comes up in some types of cheese making is whether you're using morning milk or afternoon milk. Are there designations like that with the Swiss?
You must use both. Technically it's both. Cows get milk twice a day, so there's an evening delivery, and then there's a morning delivery. And the cheese must be made, I think, for Emmentaler. For Gruyere, I think it's 15 hours. That you can't have milk stored longer than 15 hours. For La Gruyere AOP. For Emmentaler, it may be slightly longer, but not much. Like no longer than 18 hours. If not, it's 15, 18, somewhere in there. That milk that was delivered the evening before must be made into cheese, or you have to start with a different batch in order to make the cheese.
If you don't get it turned into cheese, then you might as well just turn it into yogurt or
a mountain cheese. Maybe another cheese, but it won't be allowed. And then all this is tracked. That the schedule, the deliveries, that there's a logbook this thick. many times handwritten or used or transposed into a computer system these days, where everything is logged in. That the samples that are taken from each batch for safety measures, for also for quality measuring. Some of our dairies will pay more. They have like a little incentive plan, like, hey, if you deliver me fattier and more protein-rich milk, I pay you a little more per liter. So it incentivizes the dairy farmers to do better work, feed their cows, keep them healthier, and produce better, more pristine milk. And then our cheesemaker will have a system where they'll get paid a little more for that delivery when they measure it.
Are there American companies that are partnered up with Gormino to kind of bring an American version of Emmental to this country in partnership or in any kind of relationship with Gormino, or are they two separate entities altogether?
There's no partnership that I'm aware of, but I don't know how that could. I guess it could be, if they're doing good work, maybe there's a way to where a rising tide raises all the boats. But they're really two separate entities at this point, two different systems. Especially the fact that we're talking about a proprietary cheese. It would be a trickier thing to breach, as opposed to just like maybe a mountain cheese. There would be, hey, if we make this mountain cheese over here that's not AOP, not proprietary, and then we deliver it to you young, and then you age it in your cave. That's happening. Those kinds of things, not with Gormino, but those kinds of things are happening. Other American, sellers, or in their cellar, in their affinage.
Well, I have a four cheeses behind me. I have an Emmentaler that is of designation unknown because it came from a supermarket. It was priced as an imported Emmentaler. I don't know if it is, or if if it's just an American company stealing the name again, as we discussed in part one. I have two types of Gruyere. I have a 6-month age and you advised me to get these. I believe these are both from Gormino. They came from Ormond's cheese shop, and she has a relationship with Gormino. So I have a 6-month and a 12-month. So we're going to see the differences between those. Notice also in my Emmentaler, there's holes, classic, Swiss
Can you show me the
cheese.
rind? You bring the rind a little closer. Let's see.
It's not much of a rind there to see. It's just it's a little waxy.
Raise it up a little higher. There we go.
Yeah,
so the label's taken away. So we have no idea knowing whether that's even I'm going to guess it's just by the shape. It's not Emmentaler AOP, but let me see the whole thing again.
Definitely not. It's not AOP because they they put that on there. They were charging $23, almost $24 a pound. So that sounds like an imported, but there's nothing on here. It does say fresh part skim cow's milk, cultures, salt, and enzymes.
Doesn't say what country it's from, though. And Nothing. There's no label or anything. And what's the shape of it again? Can you show me?
Well, mine's a little rectangular cut off of a wheel, I'm sure. It's got, the holes. It's got a little bit of a shiny rind.
Yeah.
But got a nice aroma.
Sure, it's tasty,
pardon me?
Yeah, I'm sure it's tasty. I'm going to guess it could be what's called Switzerland Swiss, which is even in Switzerland, they have to keep up with all the brick and block producers that are rindless, because almost every country produces a block rindless Swiss cheese, and even in Switzerland, they feel that they have to keep up and produce this cheese, which is different than AOP.
If it's rindless, does that mean it hasn't been washed in a brine?
I'm not even sure I've never really visited the production, but it doesn't have the rind like what's behind me. I can tell you that it's just just naked looking, almost like what you have.
Rachel told me that her next batch of Gormino Emmental will be coming in on Thursday. Today is Tuesday when you and I are talking, and so I'm going back in 2 days to get the real deal. I want to try that, and I'll do a little side tasting later to compare the two. But then I've got the two Gruyere, so there should be a difference between a 6-month aging and a 12-month aging. What's the minimal amount of aging in these cheeses before they can be released?
That's a great question. So Le Gruyere AOP has a minimum age of 5 months for it to bear the label, and Emmentaler AOP has a minimum age of 4. And what you have there, not only are they two different ages, but they are actually two different cheese makers. So we like to partition not only our age difference, but we usually designate we have 3 La Gruyere AOP cheesemakers and 9 Emmentaler AOP cheesemakers on our team that comprise the 12. So for each profile, we designate a different cheesemaker where we think their strengths lie in each age, so we can really focus on the conversation with the cheese shop.
Well, good, because these are both designated AOPs. And then I've got a raclette, which is, it says specifically on there, she said, note that it says French raclette, not Swiss raclette. So that's a whole cheese we haven't really talked much about, but I know that a lot of people love to view it as sort of the ultimate melting cheese, the melt and dip and scoop kind of cheese.
Yeah.
What is a raclette? How does it differ from the cheeses we've been talking about?
So earlier when we were talking about the temperature of how the curd is cooked and the cutting, so raclette is first the bacterials are different, so it's acidified differently, but the pH is different. But the curd will be cut not as small. The temperature when it's cooked will be nowhere near the higher temperature of the other one. I mean, in that case, it's that might be a pasteurized milk, but that means the pasteurization happened before it went into the vat. So then they could still cook it at a low temperature. And
but
then
it definitely feels softer than the Swiss cheeses. Yeah.
And that lends that affects the texture. Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Along with bacteria and enzymes.
I'm ready to do some tasting. Should we start with the Emmental?
Yeah, start with it. See what you.
Okay, I'm going to cut myself off a little piece. I've got my little cheese knife here.
Yeah.
What's the best way to kind of taste cheese to really grasp its essence?
I think it's like wine. I think you smell it, you hold it. You want to make sure it's room temperature if it's possible, because you're going to really,
I pulled it out a few hours ago. Yeah.
You take a bite, let it sit in your mouth for a little, maybe 1 or 2 seconds longer, almost like the equivalent of swirling wine, but you're not going to swirl the cheese. And then when you eat it and swallow, you keep your mouth closed and breathe out your nose. That engages all your taste buds in the back of your tongue and through. And you'll get more flavor out of it that way if you swallow and then exhale out of your nose.
And I'm breathing in through my mouth, and I can feel already the almost, I don't know if it's the esters or the vapors of the cheese kind of going into my olfactory senses, and it definitely suddenly changes. The flavors change and get more complex and more. I don't know if it's acidic is what I'm tasting, but it has an acidity to it.
Yeah, I usually refer to that as hopefully a lactic, like kind of a bright note maybe. On younger cheeses, they tend to be a little more that way, a little more brighter. The word in the cheese world, the word acid usually applies to like more of a technical sense. Like you ever have a really sharp provolone, like where your ears are like almost like getting a little funny. That is due to acid development. And that's more of a geeky use of the word acid. For us, we say acid, we think like we're thinking of lemon juice, and even though lemon juice is very alkaline, but like we think of it has a different application in our heads. So we think of it more like, vinegar and lemons and things that are acidy.
Why do you think that this type of cheese, and I think when I taste this, if someone said, here, taste this, what is this? I would say it tastes like a Swiss cheese to me. I mean, it's very distinctively Swiss cheese as opposed to cheddar cheese or, mozzarella cheese. Why does it go so well, number one, with ham?
Yeah.
It's the classic combo. And other cheeses that fall in this flavor profile, I would think would be Jarlsberg, would be another type of similar to Emmental. And what else? There are a couple others that are like that, right?
Yeah, there's so many. There's baby Swisses almost from like half the states in the Union. There's Maasdam, Leerdammer, French Emmental. I remember the first time I was walking with someone from my team in New York, and we went to one of the cheese stores that sell a lot of cheese, and they in the front row it said Bulgarian Swiss. French Swiss, Finlandia Swiss, Polish Swiss. They're like, oh, very interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Very interesting. For him, it was just like he couldn't believe like just how it's marketed. It's just even beyond the Swiss word. Like you're putting two countries back to back right there. But people know what people digest as an American. You get it. You're like, okay, that's a Swiss cheese made in Bulgaria, right? And we think of Swiss cheese. But to his eyes, it was like, gosh, man, it's worse than I thought over here, kind of thing. Like we have some work to do. It's like, yes, we do.
Exactly.
It's an opportunity though to help explain. So it's easy when you've heard all these carbon copies or these karaoke versions, and you play someone like the original record. Like, oh, okay, Louis Armstrong. I
Yeah.
get it. He's a trumpet player. Okay, I've been listening to marching band trumpet. I thought that was trumpet, but now you play me Louis Armstrong.
Yeah, right.
Louis Armstrong over here.
Give me the real deal.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's the original.
Wow. Well, it definitely is distinctive, and again, there's got to be kind of a flavor wheel that describes the various flavors that are coming out as as I inhale and as I am tasting it and in my full palate. That is definitely so distinctive and different from all the other types of cheeses. And I'm trying, but I don't have the language to say what that is like. But you said it's like a lactic flavor.
Maybe nutty. You get some lactic. Maybe you get lactic, nutty,
Yeah.
and maybe fruity. I'm not
I'm
eating
getting
that.
a little bit of a pear finish. I don't know if that's
Okay,
common
like
note,
pear
but
skin almost. I could get
yeah,
pear
yeah,
skin sometimes.
yeah. Something I'm getting a little of that.
Yeah,
And it's wonderful because it's complex. It's not like you eat it and then it's gone. I've already had a cracker. I've had a sip of my iced tea here, and I'm still tasting it. As I say, I tasted it 5 minutes ago, and I'm still enjoying it 5 minutes later.
yeah.
Even though it's gone from my mouth.
I mean,
So
maybe it is Emmental or AOP, just the label removed and cut really well. I mean, the price would indicate it's around that zone of real Emmental or AOP, but I don't know.
no,
It's
the
unfortunate that they
local
didn't have
markets
it labeled
don't.
that way.
Yeah, they don't have the designated cheesemongers there to explain everything to the customers, so they use the
Sure.
most generic terms as well. But they did use Emmentaler as opposed to Swiss cheese. So I guess
That's encouraging at least.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, now why don't we move on to the Gruyere? I've got two Gruyères. They're both. Here's
Yeah.
the 6 month. This one is the La Gruyere AOP six
Yep.
month.
Yep.
So I'll cut off a little piece of that.
Yeah. So that's made by our cheesemaker, Michael Hunke. And he took second prize in the Gruyere category this past year in March 22 or a
This is
year
much
ago.
funkier
Oh
than
yeah,
the Emmental. There's incredible aroma here.
you're gonna get more notes on this one than Emmentaler. It's just always the way it is. With Gruyere is like eating four cheeses at once almost. It is it's a chased profile. It's chased by many cheesemakers.
It's one of my favorite cheeses of all time is Gruyere. Um,
Same here.
I even use it on pizzas.
Oh yeah.
And of course, it's the classic fondue cheese, isn't it, Gruyere?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's the classic and probably the most famous version, Morte Morte, which is half and half, which is half La Gruyere LP and half Vacherin Free Bourgeois. They're both made in the same region. You do about 50-50. But all four of those cheeses would actually make a really delicious fondue. You know, it's similar to my fondue recipe where I have our raclette. It's raclette du Valais AOP. We'll talk about that when we get to raclette. Gruyere, and I always put about 25% Emmentaler in my fondue.
Uh, and because of the flavor notes that it brings.
Yeah, I like to bring all like different. Each cheese brings a different thing to the party, so to speak. So I usually do three cheeses. I mean, you can make it with just one. You could do it with two. I mean, it just depends on what's practical at the moment. But if I have the choice, I like to do usually three, sometimes four, and put it in the fondue. Each cheese will blend a different aspect. You know, to some will lend creaminess, some will lend body, some will lend
Uh-huh.
complexity.
This definitely very different from the Swiss cheese. The first one that we tasted. The Emmental flavor.
You probably get more oniony notes, more base oniony notes maybe to it.
Well, that you just gave me the word I was looking for because I couldn't quite nail it. But yeah, a little oniony. Not I wouldn't say garlicky, but oniony. Tone. It's not like when you taste the Emmental, you say immediately go, oh, that's a Swiss cheese. With the Gruyere, you're not going to say, oh, that's a Swiss cheese. It doesn't taste like what we call Swiss cheese. Closer more to I don't know, maybe a Fontina or something like that in terms of that funky, complex flavor.
Yeah, yeah. Gruyere is it's gonna wait till you taste the next one. It'll be even more symphonic. But the one I get, I think my notes on the Gruyere mild are that I get like almost sweet corn. Sometimes I'll get like a nutty, like a skinless hazelnut or vanilla note sometimes, but definitely the onion is in there on
I
his.
got the onion and I got the corn more than I did the hazelnut. As you said, as you saying the words, it's almost like the words are coming alive in my mouth.
Yeah, that's like the chef in me. I only describe things as like try to make it sound like a menu that you're going to eat when you bite a piece of cheese. Sometimes like And if it includes a dessert note, then I include that. When it's authentic, it has to be like really what I think and what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
coming from my experience.
Interesting. Well, it's wonderful. I'm going to now. Is it if you're going to do like what I'm doing, sort of a horizontal tasting of this? Should I clear my palate in between with a cracker or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sure, why not? You know, this way
Just to give
you're.
you a fresh take.
Yeah.
Now we've got
So
the 12-month Gruyere
So
that
the
we want
12
to
month is
try.
made by three-time world cheese champion Michael Speaker. So this cheese is pretty special in the cheese world, and the fact that this cheesemaker won 3 times Best in Show at a contest that has almost 3,500 entries each time. So out of all the categories, so you think of like that, like the famous dog show that's on once a year where each breed wins.
Yeah,
So we've won that many times with the Emmentaler. So we won like the breed with Emmentaler, but Best in Show means all the breeds. They pick one dog. It could be any kind of dog. Same thing. It could be any kind of cheese that could win in this contest. And Michael's won 3 times. Once in 2008, once in 2020, and again in 2022. And the theory we have as to why he wins is that his Gruyere is it's a little different than the others. There's like this kind of like a tropical fruity type note to it. There's like a baked ham I get sometimes.
Hmm.
I get like a chestnut note,
yeah,
a
and
chestnut sweetness sometimes.
it's definitely different from the 6 month, and but it's not as the aroma's not as funky. It doesn't smell. It doesn't just smack you in the face like the first one did. So it's a milder aroma, but then in the mouth it kind of widens and goes really
Yeah, it's almost
in a
like
lot of
and
directions.
I like to think it's expressive. So sometimes I'll taste a Gruyere, not when it's not ours usually, where if I don't like it, the best way to describe why don't I like it is that the flavor just seems like dead. I don't know how to explain it. It just seems like dead and down on the bottom, and there's all too much of one thing, not playing off each other. This is dynamic. It seems alive, almost like you could see on a screen almost what you're tasting. It's expressive,
But it's
structured,
also very balanced.
productive.
It's not like there's any one flavor that dominates. It's almost like a melange of flavors.
Yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful cheese board cheese to discover, and of course, if you put it on a pizza, I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, go ahead. I mean, it's going to be delicious.
Yeah,
Especially if you when you pull the pizza out and then you put on some freshly sliced prosciutto or something.
yeah.
After the pizza's comes out of the oven, you
I
got
noticed
yourself
that
a ham and cheese right there, like no other.
really. Yeah, I noticed that there's a kind of a crystal. There's crystals in here. Is
Yeah.
that a common trait?
I think yes, it is. In a well-aged cheese, they're called tyrosine crystals. It's an amino acid chain that forms in the cheese. It tends to add to the gustatory experience and pleasure of eating. It's a rather nice, beautiful quality that we call them in some circles they call them cheese diamonds, even like cheese.
Ah,
Certainly crystals is more of the ubiquitous term.
so because
And
I didn't get those crystals in the 6 month
yeah, too
version.
young of a cheese. That if that one were to be older, you would see it. It would taste different too, because it's a different cheese maker.
And
So
one other thing I just noticed, Joe, is that when I got to the rind, then a whole other flavor popped. So so again, you're supposed to eat the rind on these cheeses, right? I mean, it would be a sin to throw away the rind, right?
I agree with you. It's really your preference. Here's what we can say: not going to hurt you, and it's your choice. Does it add to the eating experience? Does it add value? Does it take away?
I think it adds. I mean, I just got like this. I'm enjoying the sort of the crumb of the piece, and then all of a sudden I'm getting to the crust, and all of a sudden a whole other flavor profile pops up, and it has a little bit more of the funky quality, but in a really good way, not in a I don't know what the right way to say it, but it's not negative at all. It just enhances it, but it gives it more complexity.
And to our pizza makers that are using Le Gruyere AOP or Emmentaler AOP on a pizza, chances are it's a younger profile like that one. And I've seen the cooks or the chefs cut away the rind, and there's just no reason to do that. What they should be doing is removing the paper label with the back of a dull knife, wiping the rind down, clean it with a hot cloth, and then usually they're shredding for pizza. Shred the whole thing. rind, crust, all. If it looks a little too crummy on the top, like you just again scrape it with like a peeler or a cheese plane. They take the minimal surface away needed to then proceed, but don't literally cut all the rind off. Just put it in your mix and shredded cheese and bake it and use it. Don't waste that money. It's part of the cheese. And sometimes when I'm able to have a conversation with a chef about that, they really thank me because it's just like I just helped their food cost on that item by like 3% or something.
Right, right. And if you're making a fondue, if you're making a fondue out of these cheeses, then you would definitely want to mix the rind in with or is that a time where maybe you wouldn't?
Again, a preference. I would take a peeler and really make sure there's no. If they're using an aged cheese, I think you want to remove the rind. But on a super young cheese, you could just put it in there. It's just going to look like little specks in there, like a spices in there. It's not going to hurt the fondue. That's also a matter of preference. How silky do you want it? If you're serving to the public and you do that at this point in time, they're going to send it back. They're going to say something's inside my fondue.
I said, yeah.
So it just depends, on the situation. If you're home with your family and you've spent good money on cheese and you're grading it yourself and you're not buying a fondue mix, like why not? I would like to create a trend where there's a fondue natural mix, meaning the rind and everything, and then the price can be kept even more affordable because in certain situations the rinds are absolutely delicious depending on the cheese.
Yeah,
and we shouldn't have to cut them away.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to get to the raclette. So let me try this one, and it's not one that is commonly. I mean, isn't raclette normally melted or is it held over some kind of a heat lamp or something when it's served in on cheese boards or what? That's
the most viral popular thing that you see happening now. I mean, raclette videos have become, especially with social media and the quick reels, someone scraping raclette onto a bowl of food has become a pretty sexy thing. So, but a good raclette, like we work with a raclette from a maker in the Valais. So raclette is a word also that gets, used in different regions of the world. France has a claim on the word too. So there's not been a real ruling that I'm aware of, but Raclette du Valais AOP, that is a specific place. That's small production. It's not far. It's just over the border and mountains from Fontina. So Fontina and Raclette du Valais AOP, they're going to be similar in the sense, even down to cow breed. But Raclette du Valais AOP is a tiny, tiny, tiny place production-wise versus even Raclette Swiss, which could be made anywhere in Switzerland with Swiss milk, and then raclette from other countries. So there's all these subdivisions, but Raclette du Valais AOP is even a smaller subset. It melts at a lower temperature. It's silky. The crust is absolutely delicious, but there's good inspired versions. I'm sure the one you're eating is a tasty inspired version, but some could argue that it could just be a table cheese if it's a delicious, if it's like I think the Raclette du Valais AOP deserves its right as a table cheese. It's just that delicious as well. Yeah, and it definitely has. I definitely got a little onion hint with this one, and some crystals. But it's cream. The cheese was creamy. As I got closer to the rind, I got this crystallization, and yeah, it does remind me a little bit of a Fontina. It's milder than I was expecting. It's pretty smooth. This is a French one that we're using today. No, I think because that's all she had. So typically this would be used. It could be used just as a table cheese, but often it's used as a melter or as a. In the USA, it seems the trend is from what I see. 90 there's almost like a season. Somehow it's also has to do it has to be cold outside. I think we're stretching the season out where we're getting into spring more and hey, put it on the grill and put it on burgers, but it seems to be eaten. I'm going to take I haven't studied any data on this, but I'm going to take a stab at this. I'm going to say 95% of the time it's melted, it's eaten in a melted form, or maybe more. Maybe someone will say, Joe, it's 100%. I'm like, okay. I haven't really studied it, but that's how it is. It's a beautiful melting cheese. It's a beautiful melting cheese. It's sort of like the the forerunner. The Americans have bastardized it into Velveeta or something like that. But it's the top of the mountain peak of sort of this melting cheese. Well,
This has
Yeah.
been great because I've learned a lot just talking about all these things. I hope I can retain even a fraction of what we talked about today, but we covered a lot. I've got some cheese left that I'll be sharing with my wife, and I'm going to try to impress her by telling her now what flavor tones she should look for and what the differences are in each of these.
Yeah.
And Joe, thank you so much for being with us today on Pizza Quest, and for
Yeah.
for your quest. We would love to hear more about why you ended up leaving the chef world to enter into the cheese world, but
Oh,
we're gonna have to save that for the next time we have you on. We'd love to have you on again, and maybe when
yeah.
I can get my hands on some of the AOP raclettes and and what's the other one that I didn't have today? The Emmental. I'll get
Yeah.
that, the real deal, and maybe we can go to the deeper dive level the next time we have you.
Let me know. I'd still always cook, and I'll be making pizza soon as well with one or some of these cheeses, and yeah, we'll be in touch, and we'll figure
Let's
out.
compare notes when you do the pizzas. I'd love to hear what you think, and if you have any recommendations for our listeners, for specific recommendations of which cheeses to use. I've been making making some of the flammekuchs, the carte flambée pizzas lately, and using Gruyere on my version of that. So, and I love that.
Right
But
on. Yeah, I have recipes of both pizza and the. Is it Flammkuchen you're talking about? Is that the same
yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Yeah,
flammekuchen and carte flambée are the same. Yeah,
yeah. I can send you my recipes for those, which include Emmentaler, I believe.
there
So
you go. Yeah.
see what you think of them. I'd be curious.
Well, it would make sense because again, usually there's bacon or something else, some kind of a ham product with it. So it's ham and it's the ultimate ham and cheese.
Ultimate. I'm getting hungry right now just thinking about
All right.
it.
Well, thanks for making us hungry and for
Yeah.
for educating us. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you in the future. Best
Great.
of success with cutting the curd. For those of you who are listening, definitely check out the whole menu of cutting the curd on the hrn.org homepage. And Joe, say hello to your co-host.
I will. If I may, please follow us at Cutting the Curd. That's our Instagram handle. And if anybody wants to follow me at Sting Chef, there's always a connection between
Well,
the two.
say that last one at what?
At Sting Chef.
Sting Chef. Sting Chef. Okay, Sting. And say hi to Kara and Jessica, your co-host, for me as well.
I will.
We
Thank
will
you.
see you again soon. And for those of you who are with us today, we'll see you on the next episode of Pizza Quest. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.
Pizza Quest is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.